She wasn't the kind of woman who turned heads when she walked into a room. Not because she wasn't worth looking at, but because she'd spent 7 years making sure no one did. Phoebe Larkin had a system: dark colors, sensible shoes, hair pulled back so tight it gave her a headache by noon. She sat in the corner of every meeting, spoke only when spoken to, and kept her eyes fixed on the numbers in front of her. The only language she trusted completely. Numbers didn't lie. Numbers didn't look you up and down. Numbers didn't make you feel like you were taking up too much space just by existing. She was 31 years old, the head accountant for a real estate development firm called Creston Group, and she was extraordinarily good at her job. So good, in fact, that she had kept 6 sets of books simultaneously for the past 4 years without a single discrepancy. 3 sets for the IRS, 1 for the board, 1 for the silent investors, and 1 for the man who actually owned everything. His name was Silvano Mace. No, wait, that one was on the list. His name was Emmerich Voss. The papers called him a developer. The city council called him a philanthropist. The people who moved money through his hands at 3 in the morning called him something else entirely. Phoebe just called him Mr. Voss, kept her voice flat when she said it, and never, ever made eye contact if she could help it. Emmerich Voss was 42 years old, 6'2", and built like a man who had once done something violent for a living and hadn't entirely stopped. He had dark hair, threaded through with the first grey of a man who'd earned it the hard way, and eyes the colour of a winter storm, that particular shade of grey-green that made you think of cold water and zero mercy. He wore custom suits that probably cost more than Phoebe's monthly rent. And he spoke in the kind of measured, quiet tone that made every room go still the moment he opened his mouth. He had never once looked at Phoebe Larkin the way a man looks at a woman. She had never expected him to. She was the woman who balanced his books, the woman who caught the discrepancy in the Hargrove Street account that would have cost him $4 million, who restructured the offshore holdings when the regulations changed, who had quietly, very quietly, made sure that certain payments reached certain people without any fingerprints anywhere. She was useful, she was precise, she was invisible, and she had made peace with that, mostly. The call came on a Thursday afternoon in late October, while Phoebe was cross-referencing the quarterly returns for the lakefront development. "Mr. Voss will need you to attend the Meridian dinner on Saturday," said Cressida, his personal assistant, in the tone she reserved for things that were not actually questions. 9 o'clock, the Aldwyn. Phoebe's stomach dropped. The Aldwyn meant the most expensive restaurant in the city. The Meridian dinner meant Emmerich Voss was closing a deal worth somewhere north of $60 million, and he needed his accountant present to field questions if the numbers came up. "Of course," Phoebe said. "I'll prepare the supplementals. He'll have a car sent at 8:30. The call ended. Phoebe sat very still for a moment and then opened her calendar and looked at what she'd had planned for Saturday night. A first date. She almost laughed. His name was William Pratt. He was a high school history teacher, divorced once, owned a Labrador named Fenwick, and had messaged her on the dating app with a reference to a 19th century economic theory that she had found genuinely charming. They'd been talking for 3 weeks. He was kind and warm and entirely, thoroughly normal, and Phoebe had been looking forward to Saturday with the particular brand of cautious hope she'd learned to keep very small, like a candle flame in a high wind. She called Cressida back. "The dinner? Is my presence required for the full evening or just during the financial review portion?" A pause. The kind that said the question was slightly beneath Cressida's patience. "The full evening, Miss Larkin. Mr. Voss's guests will want to speak with you directly." "Of course, thank you." She hung up and texted William Pratt. "Something's come up for work Saturday night. I'm so sorry, work." His reply came quickly. "Sunday's perfect. Fenwick will be disappointed he has to wait an extra day to hear about you." She smiled at her phone longer than was probably professional. The Aldwin was exactly as intimidating as she'd known it would be. Phoebe arrived in the car Emmerich had sent, black, silent, with a driver who did not make small talk, wearing the only dress she owned that seemed appropriate for a $60 million dinner. It was navy, a line, modest neckline. She had worn it to her cousin's wedding 18 months ago, and it had done its job perfectly, which was to say, no one had commented on it at all. She smoothed it as she stepped out onto the curb and looked up at the carved limestone facade of the Aldwin. Inside, she was led through a room that felt like the inside of a jewelry box. Dark wood, low lighting, white tablecloths stiff as cardboard, the kind of quiet that only very expensive rooms could buy. The maitre brought her to a private dining room at the back, where Emmerich Voss stood at the window with a glass of something amber in his hand. He turned when she entered. He looked at her the way he always looked at her. The way you look at a trusted instrument, briefly, assessing function, moving on. "Miss Larkin." He nodded. "The Pellegrino group arrives at 9. Castle will handle the contract language. I need you on the liquidity projections for the second phase and the offshore structure. Ready?" She held up the leather portfolio she'd prepared. "I ran 3 scenarios based on their likely questions." Something shifted almost imperceptibly in his expression. Not warmth, exactly. More like a kind of recognition. The way you acknowledge a very good tool. "Good," he said, and turned back to the window. The dinner went exactly as these things went. Pellegrino's people were sharp, suspicious in the way of men who had not survived this long by being otherwise, and they asked exactly the questions she'd predicted. She answered each one precisely, without elaboration, without nerves, and she watched Emmerich Voss across the table register each answer with the same micro-expression, a slight easing around the jaw, satisfaction at the performance of a well-calibrated machine. By 11, the deal was effectively closed, pending signatures. The Pellegrino group retired to discuss privately. Emmerich exchanged low words with Casselter, his lawyer, and Phoebe quietly excused herself to the restroom. In the marble quiet of the powder room, she looked at herself in the mirror for a long moment. She looked tired. She looked like a woman who had been professional all evening and was slightly exhausted from it. Her hair had mostly held its pins. The navy dress was still doing its job of existing without being noticed. She thought about William Pratt and his Labrador, named Fenwick. She washed her hands, pressed a damp fingertip carefully under each eye, and went back out. She nearly collided with a man in the corridor. "Phoebe?" She blinked. Standing in front of her, holding a small bouquet of restaurant roses with the sheepish expression of a man caught doing something earnest, was William Pratt. He was taller than she'd imagined. Sandy hair, glasses slightly crooked, wearing a navy blazer over a shirt that was trying its best. He looked exactly like his photos, which she had always considered a good sign. "I'm so sorry," he started. "What are you?" She started at the same time. They both stopped. "I made a reservation here," he said, with the careful smile of someone genuinely embarrassed. "I was going to suggest we move our Sunday dinner here instead, as a kind of, I don't know, a gesture. And then I got your text, but I'd already confirmed the table, and my friend dared me to come anyway on the off chance." He stopped, ran a hand through his hair. "This is terrible. I'm sorry. You're working. I'll go." Phoebe looked at the roses. She looked at William Pratt's crooked glasses and his slightly too hopeful expression, and something loosened in her chest. Something she had kept very tightly wound for a very long time. "You brought flowers," she said. "To a restaurant. I brought flowers to a restaurant," he confirmed, grimacing slightly. "In my defense, I've been told I'm romantic to the point of impracticality." "Who told you that?" "My ex-wife. It was not a compliment." Phoebe almost laughed. "The table is already reserved." "Already reserved." She looked back toward the private dining room. The Pellegrino group was still in conference. Emmerich Voss would not need her again for at least an hour. I have approximately 45 minutes, she said. William Pratt's face did something she hadn't expected, something unguarded and genuine and a little dazzled. That's 45 more minutes than I was planning on. They sat at a small table near the front of the main dining room, and she put the roses to one side because they were absurd and also secretly delightful. And William ordered wine he couldn't actually afford in this place, and she ordered the soup because she wasn't hungry, but wanted something to do with her hands. And they talked. They just talked. About the 19th century economic theory that had started their messaging, about his students, who were 17 and deeply uninterested in the past. About the fact that Fenwick had eaten an entire throw pillow last week and seemed proud of himself. He asked what she loved about accounting. Not what she did, what she loved about it. And she told him about the way a balanced ledger felt like a proof, like a solved equation. Like the universe briefly admitting it made sense, and he listened with his chin in his hand and said, "That's one of the most quietly beautiful things I've ever heard anyone say about math." No one had ever said anything like that to her about her work. She was smiling at him, actually smiling. Not the careful professional expression she'd kept fixed all evening, when she became aware of a stillness at the edge of the room. The particular kind of stillness that followed Emmerich Voss when he moved through a space. She turned. He was standing at the entrance to the main dining room, hands in his trouser pockets, his lawyer, Castle, somewhere behind him, and he was looking directly at her. Not at the table, not past her, at her. His expression was. She couldn't read it. She had spent 4 years reading Emmerich Voss's micro-expressions in high-stakes rooms, and she could not, in this moment, read what was on his face. William followed her gaze and looked over his shoulder. "Colleague?" he asked, without any particular alarm. "My employer," she said. "Ah." William straightened slightly and offered the easy, uncomplicated smile of a man with nothing to hide. "Should I?" "No," she met Emmerich's gaze across the room. Held it. "Stay." She turned back to William Pratt. Her heart was doing something strange and complicated. "Tell me more about Fenwick," she said. Emmerich Voss did not return to the private dining room. He stood at the entrance of the main dining room for longer than was appropriate, glass of water in hand. He had no idea how it had gotten there, and watched Phoebe Larkin sit across from a man in an insufficient blazer and talk like he had never seen her talk before. She was smiling. He had not. In 4 years of watching her work, 4 years of watching her navigate rooms that would have broken lesser people, 4 years of relying on her with his money and his freedom, and, if he was honest, considerably more than that. He had not once seen her smile like that. The smile she gave in meetings was controlled. Professional. It did not reach her eyes. This one reached her eyes. The man said something. She laughed, and the sound carried across the quiet room, and 3 people at neighboring tables turned to look because it was the kind of laugh that made a room feel warmer. Emmerich set his water glass down on the nearest flat surface, which happened to be a waiter's tray, and the waiter startled, and Emmerich did not notice. He was watching the man hand Phoebe a small cluster of restaurant roses. Where had he gotten those? The maitre d' had some displayed near the entrance. Had the man actually walked up and asked for them? And he was watching Phoebe take them with an expression he had never seen on her face, like she was surprised anyone had thought to. Something happened in Emmerich Voss's chest that he did not have language for. He had been in this business long enough that he recognized the physical sensation of something he didn't want to acknowledge, the particular pressure behind the sternum that meant, pay attention. Something important is happening, and you are not going to like it. He had felt it once before a building caught fire, once before a deal fell through in a way that cost him everything, once before his brother had called to tell him their father was dead. He felt it now, watching a history teacher hand roses to his accountant in a restaurant he owned. "Voss!" Castle appeared at his elbow. "Pellegrino's ready for the final terms." In a moment. A pause. Sir! One moment, Castle. Castle went silent. He had learned over years of service exactly which tone meant that the conversation was over. Phoebe was leaning forward slightly now. The man, what was he? Some kind of academic. He had the rumpled look of a person who worked in a school, somewhere safe and ordinary and nothing. Nothing like the world that Phoebe moved through every day. The man was saying something with his hands, animated, and Phoebe had her elbow on the table, chin near her palm, watching him with the full weight of her attention. She was listening the way she listened to Emmerich when he laid out a complex financial structure. The way she listened to things that mattered to her, the pressure behind his sternum got worse. He had never once asked her what mattered to her. He realized this now. He had asked her about leverage ratios and regulatory risk, and the most efficient structure for a holding company. He had never asked what made her laugh. He turned and walked back toward the private dining room. Mr. Voss! The matron appeared. Your guest. Nothing, he said. I need nothing. Phoebe had been back in the private dining room for 11 minutes when the restaurant's lights flickered. Once. Twice. Then held. She looked up from the supplemental documents she was reorganizing and found every person in the room doing the same. Emmerich Voss was already standing. Power grid or something structural? She asked quietly. Neither. His jaw was set. That's a signal. The next 4 minutes happened very fast. Castle was on his phone. 2 of Emmerich's men, who had been stationed at the far end of the corridor all evening, in the way that people who didn't know how to look for things would never have noticed, appeared in the doorway. There was a rapid exchange in low voices. The Pellegrino group stirred, alarmed. Emmerich crossed the room to Phoebe in 6 steps. With me, he said. What's happening? With me. He said it again, differently. Not as a command, as something else. His hand closed around her wrist, not hard, not tight, just certain, and she found herself moving before she'd made the decision to. They went through a door she hadn't noticed. A service corridor that smelled of clean linen and industrial cleaner, and Emmerich moved through it with the ease of a man who had always known exactly where the exits were. One of his men, Rourke, she thought his name was. She'd seen him before, materialized ahead of them, and held a door. 2 at the east entrance, Rourke said. Armed the car? 90 seconds. Pellegrino, their people have them. This isn't about them. Emmerich's hand moved from her wrist to the small of her back. Keep moving. I have my bag. I'll replace what's in your bag. The documents in my bag. A fractional pause. Then, almost to himself, of course. He looked at Rourke. Her bag. Private dining room. Under the table on the left. Rourke disappeared without a word. The alley behind the Aldwyn was cold and smelled of wet pavement, and Phoebe stood in her navy dress and told herself to breathe. She had worked at the edge of this world for 4 years. She had known, abstractly, that moments like this existed. She had simply never been inside one. Emmerich stood close, not touching her now, but close in the way that said the touching was still an option he was prepared to exercise immediately. Are you all right? He asked. His voice was different. She had heard it stripped of its meeting room calm before, in moments of acute pressure, but it had always still been controlled. This was something else, slightly rough at the edges, like he was working at keeping something back. I'm fine, she said. What was that? A message from someone who wants me to know they can find me in public places. What kind of message? The kind I'll be responding to. A flat certainty in his voice. It won't happen again. Rourke reappeared with her bag. She took it, checked quickly, documents intact, and exhaled. She became aware, in the dim light of the alley, that Emmerich Voss was looking at her. Not the way he looked at her in meetings. Not the assessing look. Not the brief acknowledgement of useful function. Something different. Something she did not have a word for yet, but recognized the shape of. The man in the restaurant, he said. It wasn't quite a question. Phoebe met his eyes. William. He's a history teacher. Emmerich's expression did something complicated and controlled, and she watched him reach for the control and find it. He made you laugh. She blinked. Yes, you don't laugh. Not like that. A pause. I've been paying attention for 4 years and you don't laugh like that. Phoebe was quiet for a moment. The alley was very cold and very still. Maybe, she said slowly, that's because no one's given me much reason to. He looked at her for a long time. The car pulled up at the end of the alley, headlights cutting through the dark. Get in the car, he said. I'll take you home, Emmerich. It was the first time she had used his name. She hadn't meant to. It came out differently than she'd expected. Not unprofessional, exactly, just honest. Just his name in her mouth, plain as a fact. He went very still. Phoebe. Her name in his voice had the same quality, like he was trying the weight of it. I'm fine, she said. I can get a cab. You will not get a cab. I've gotten cabs before. Not after someone sends me a signal in a restaurant you're currently sitting in. The control had something under it now, something warmer and harder to name. Get in the car, please. The please was what got her. She'd never heard him use it before. Not like that. She got in the car. He sat across from her in the back of the car, not beside her, and he looked out the window for a long time. The city moved past them, street by street, and Phoebe held her bag in her lap and watched him in the dark and tried to make sense of the past 30 minutes. The roses, he said, still looking at the window. What? He brought you roses? A pause. To a restaurant? He's? She stopped. Started again. He had a reservation that he hadn't cancelled. He thought it might. She didn't know how to finish that sentence in a way that sounded reasonable. It was a kind gesture. He doesn't know you. Another pause. Longer. I know you. Phoebe's heart rate did something irregular. You know my work, she said carefully. He turned from the window. In the dark of the car, the grey-green of his eyes was darker, harder to read. Your favorite coffee is a medium dark roast, no sugar, and you switch to tea at 2 in the afternoon because caffeine past noon gives you a headache. You reorganize your desk twice a week when you're stressed, counterclockwise. You always double-check columns that other people have already verified because you don't trust anything you haven't verified yourself. You eat lunch alone and you bring your own food because the sandwiches from the building deli have MSG in them and you're sensitive to it. You wear earphones in the elevator so people don't talk to you, but half the time there's nothing actually playing. Phoebe stared at him. You've been crying, he continued, almost to himself. Approximately 3 times in 4 years, always after 7 in the evening, always with the office door locked. And each time it happened, someone in your family had said something to you about your weight. I don't know who. I've wanted to know who. The car felt very small. Why? She said. Have you been paying attention? Emmerich Voss looked at her, and she watched him choose in real time between the answer he had given himself for 4 years and the one that was true. Because, he said, you are the most extraordinary person I have ever worked alongside, and I have spent 4 years telling myself that was sufficient reason. Phoebe's throat felt tight. It isn't, she said. No. He looked at her steadily. It isn't. The car stopped. She looked out the window. Her building, neither of them moved for a moment. William Pratt is kind and normal and owns a dog named Fenwick, and he called my work quietly beautiful. A pause. He sees me. I see you. His voice was low and entirely, undeniably certain. Phoebe, I have always seen you. I have not known what to do with what I see. That, she said, is an honest answer. I'm done being dishonest about it. She looked at him. In the low light, stripped of the meeting room and the money and the $60 million deals, he looked like a man who had just acknowledged something he couldn't take back, something he didn't want to. I have a date with him on Sunday, she said. I know. I'm not cancelling it. I know that too. A pause. I'm not asking you to. Then what are you asking? Emmerich Voss was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the city went on about its business, entirely indifferent to what was happening in the back of this car. I'm asking, he said, Whether there's a version of this in which I don't lose you. Her heart was doing something she couldn't name, something large and complicated and slightly terrifying. You don't own me, she said. You're not losing me. You never had me. I know that. You can't just. She stopped, tried again. 4 years. You could have said any of this. You had 4 years. I'm saying it now. His eyes didn't leave hers. That's the only thing I can offer you. Now, however late it is. Phoebe looked at him for a long time. She thought about the navy dress and the way she'd worn her hair. And the roses that were still sitting on a table in the Aldwyn. And William Pratt's crooked glasses and his history teacher hands. And the way Emmerich Voss had said please in an alley behind a restaurant like the word had cost him something real. She thought about 7 years of making herself invisible and 4 years of being seen in exactly the wrong way, and 31 minutes of being seen in exactly the right one, and this moment in a car at the end of an October night that felt like something she'd have to make a decision about. I'm going to Sunday dinner, she said. Yes, and you're going to deal with whatever that message was tonight. Yes, and then? She stopped, looked at her hands. I don't know what then looks like. Neither do I. A beat. But I'd like to figure it out with you, if you'll let me try. She looked at him. One more long moment. The kind that would mean something later when she tried to remember it. I'll think about it, she said. And she opened the door. And she got out of the car. And she walked into her building without looking back. She took the elevator up to her floor, unlocked her door, sat down on her couch in her navy dress, with her leather portfolio in her lap, and put her face in her hands. Not because she was sad, not because she was frightened, because for the first time in longer than she could easily remember, the question of who she was to someone, who she really was, past the ledgers and the columns and the meticulous invisible usefulness, felt like a question worth asking. Her phone buzzed. From William Pratt, that was the best 45 minutes of an accidental date I've ever had. Fenwick wants a full report. So do I. She smiled at her phone, genuinely, the kind that reached her eyes. Then she looked up at the ceiling for a long time. Then she opened her portfolio and began preparing Monday's numbers, because she was Phoebe Larkin, and the ledgers still needed balancing, and some things did not pause for complicated men in expensive suits, who had figured out, 4 years too late, that she was worth the words. They could figure out the rest later. For now, there was work to do, and a Sunday dinner to look forward to, and something that felt cautiously, carefully, like a candle flame in a high wind, a little like hope.